Magandang umaga po sa iyong lahat. Ako po si Bayani Generoso and welcome to TerpTalks Season 2, brought to you by the Philippine National Association of Sign Language Interpreters. We have an amazing show for you today, but first I'd like to introduce a very special co-host today from the beautiful Cebu City, where the heart sings, Miss Isha.
Hi! Hello, everyone!
Ayong buntag.
Mayong buntag, Sir Bay.
So, gapa kaayo ka? Kahibaw ka mo English?
Salamat! Yes, kabalo kayo.
I love Cebu.
I love the energy, Sir Bay.
Well, it's early morning, and
Wow.
we need to wake up our viewers because it's going to be a very very exciting show today. Do you know what we're going to talk about?
I think we will be talking about allyship and building communities and strengthening communities with the deaf and interpreters. And I think that's very interesting to talk about it right now.
Yes, and we have a special guest to add discourse to the conversation, Mr. Magic Mike $1,000,000. He's a fan of Terp Talks. He was also a presenter at our Quaranterps, which by the way was just a few weeks ago. Nanood kayo ng Quaranterps?
Yes, po, I did. I did. Even with a busy
So,
schedule, I was able to watch some of the sessions.
what was your favorite part?
The research presentation, the presentation of Sir John Balisa's research with the interpreters from different regions of the Philippines. I think it was very interesting, and it was also a very good material for self-reflection as an interpreter.
Oo nga, like that's one thing that our community needs is more research in sign language
True,
and
true.
interpreting so that we can establish these systems and standards and really develop our profession. And in addition to learning about the research side, there was skill side, and then there was a self-development side that really opened up my mind and opened up my heart. And it really coincides with allyship kasi with allyship, it's about understanding the self so that you can align yourself with the community that you are servicing. So ayun yun.
Yes, true, true. That's very true.
So how was your morning today? Did you have breakfast?
Yes, I did have breakfast with family, and then I'm having my coffee right now. How about you,
Oh,
sir?
nice. I had my breakfast. I had ano ba yun? Itlog, and I'm having my water now. I had too much coffee
All
already.
right.
So kaya ako na medyo super excited.
I can
Yeah.
see that.
Yeah, I'm sure we have a few viewers now. Maybe we can get them on screen just to say hello.
Okay, let's do it.
Ayan, si Sir Erich. Good morning po sa lahat.
Hi, Sir Erich.
Good morning po sa inyo. Yeah. Miss
Oh,
Bella
wow.
Calbay. She is in Canada. How are you
Yes.
guys? Fine, thank
Oh,
you. Miss you. We also want to acknowledge that this show wouldn't happen without everybody involved. Yung mga backstage, yung mga interpreters natin, si Sir Jojo and Sir Lester will be accompanying us. And of course, Miss Nati, who was the initiator of this show from Pinasli. Maybe we can get her in to talk about Pinasli a little bit. Is Miss Natalie online? Can we get Miss Natalie? Wala pa. Nahihiya. Nagpapalit ng damit. Kasi impromptu to, hindi to sa plano, pero it would be nice to have Miss Nati in to talk about a little bit more about Pinasli, our goals as an association. Like I said before, we had Core and Terps as professional development sa ating mga interpreters from all over the Philippines so that they can enjoy some training, some insights, some research so that they can apply it to their practice. So, ano pa? Is there anything that you want to talk about, Miss Ishat?
um, Actually, I'm quite nervous right now. I
Oh,
feel like
don't
I'm a
be.
guest. I feel like I'm a guest. I was actually surprised that I would be co-hosting with you.
Hmm.
I think yeah. Well, let's just enjoy this morning with our guest and everyone who's coming in much
Yeah,
later.
and that's a great thing about being self-awareness is acknowledging the nervousness, and then once it's done, it's out of the way, and then we can just focus on the discussion at hand because it's a very
Yeah.
important one. Many interpreters are questioning about what their role is in their community kasi pag minsan iisa lang sila, and then it seems like the weight of the entire deaf community is on their shoulders. And that's why we're here, so we can open up the discussion and talk about certain concepts, strategies, and understanding where your boundaries lie, where your role is as an bilang interpreter. So
Yes,
ayan.
indeed. I think I would be learning a lot from this morning's conversations as well because well, like what you said, a lot of us here in the provinces we're doing the work. Some of us are just alone or in a very small community, and this would really help us to gain insights about how to go about this and how to connect with other interpreters in their areas. So this is going to be very very
Tama.
helpful.
Yeah, kasi we can't build a community nag-iisa lang tayo, right? We have to
Yes,
have
yes,
people involved, and that's the whole concept of allyship. So ayan.
true.
Uh so is Miss Nati in, or is she too shy? Does she want to come in online? Sorry to put the spot on you, pero she can't. Miss Nati. Well, anyway,
Why
si
why
Pinasli
can't she? Oh, all right.
nasa seminar pa daw. Nasa seminar. Okay, she's doing dual hats. Okay lang. We're here. We just wanted her to talk about Pinasli, pero I can do that naman. Pinasli, like I said, is an association for sign language interpreters, and if you want to join us and become a member, we'll give you the link after the show so that you can. Uh, ano ba yan? Meron wala. Okay, so we'll give you the link after the show, give you some information on how to join, and give you some more information about our organization and our mandate and what we can offer you. So ayan. So the reason why I asked you if you can speak English is we have a very special guest nga today who is very spoken in English. And
Like you, like
like
yourself.
me, yeah, well,
Yeah,
I try to go, Tagalog, but it just comes out really bad sometimes. But alam mo
that's all
na,
right.
that's all right. It's just about how you communicate and whether or not your idea natabla ba siya or misunderstanding ba siya. Yung ganon. So we have Mr. Mike McMillian. So can we welcome him to the show, Mr. Magic Mike?
Hi, good morning. Good morning.
Good
Hello, good
morning.
morning.
How are you today?
Good, thank you. And you?
Very well, thank you.
Good, good.
Miss Ishat, how are you now?
I'm good. I'm preparing myself for an entire conversation in English. So, okay, I'm just gonna try to relax myself right now.
And it's okay if you can speak in Tagalog. Like this show is all about access. We have interpreters for the deaf, and of course we have each other to support each other if we need to interpret our mother tongue language into English or vice versa.
All right,
So
thanks
okay
very much.
naman siya. Yeah, no worries. So how is the weather down there?
Where? Here in
With
Texas?
Yes, in Texas.
Cold.
Yeah,
Very cold today. We've had a cold front and some rain move through, so it's very cold.
yeah,
I see.
you're in the middle of an election, I hear,
Yes, very soon.
and it's very pivotal actually to the way people will view Americans from this point on because uh, well, I don't want to get too political, but just the fact that your president doesn't provide access for the deaf, it shows something to us. Like whereas in the Philippines, we're really starting to push for more access, more sign language interpreting in the news, and I feel it's really important to have the deaf understand what's going on in their environment politically.
Exactly. I
Yeah.
agree.
So there's some political stuff happening here in the Philippines as well, but we'll leave that to another show. Today we're going to talk about allyship and building relationships. So
Yes.
So it was interesting when we got together and threw together ideas. This topic came about because we were hearing from our quarantine participants that where they're living it is very remote, and sometimes they, or more often than not, they don't have any support from their communities, be it interpreting or deaf. And I think allyship is something that would really uh, bring them to the next level, because like I mentioned before, it's about understanding the self, and when you have that self-awareness, then you're much more effective in terms of understanding your role in the community.
I agree. Um, I think the whole place to start would be at even simple definitions of what is allyship and what is an ally. I mean,
Sure.
just what is the concept there in the Philippines?
Well, let's going back to my training,
Mm.
I'm reminded of the different interpreting models that were in place in the deaf community, where interpreters were seen as helper, and then eventually they were a machine, then they were a communication facilitator with those famous smocks, those like vests, and then they became bilingual, bicultural, and then they became an ally. So it was an evolution. Here in the Philippines, since it's very new, the profession of interpreting, we are still in that realm of helper model, where we, like I said, sometimes we're the only interpreter in our area,
Mhm.
and the entire deaf community it falls on underneath our shoulders, and so we're kind of obliged to help.
I think that in all of those models, none of them were necessarily meant to do harm. It's
Hmm.
just like you say, it's an evolution of time and experience and relationships. And as the field grew, there was a realization that certain times something needed to be different because it wasn't necessarily working so well,
Hmm.
and something was changed and perceived to improve, but still was not perfect. And even allyship now as a model is not necessarily what an ally versus an allyship, and allyship as a model
Hmm.
still may not be perfection.
Yeah. And that's a good point about it's developing, and it has to also coincide with the culture in the communities that we're working with, because
Right.
sometimes it might be a mixture of some things,
Hmm.
right? It depends always on the situation. So let's talk about intent, because like you said, we don't have an intention of doing harm, but some interpreters with their really good intentions sometimes make the situations a little bit worse, because they really don't understand what the dynamics are, how the deaf people are being oppressed. So we have this issue in the community about teaching sign language, hearing people teaching sign language. Uh, what about there in Cebu, Miss Shat? Are there who are the ones who teach sign language there? Is it the deaf
From well,
community
from
or is it hearing?
well, from what I know that there's a deaf community or deaf leaders who are conducting or who are giving sign language training. But I also
Hmm.
know that there are other communities and other organizations giving sign language training, and the trainers who do these trainings are hearing. So I think with in relation to the model that you were giving earlier, I think it's important that we educate the hearing people about that the deaf actually own this language and that they have to be the ones to do that. But it's not necessarily something I wouldn't say that the intention is um to do harm, like what Mike said. But I think they just, maybe there's that need to connect with the deaf community and to be able to communicate the intent, and to communicate, the deaf being able to communicate to the hearing that this is our language and we have to be the ones to teach it. And it would have to, and I think these hearing people would have to communicate their intent also to the deaf community. So I think it's very important to do collaboration, and in order to do collaboration, there has to be communication with that. So yeah.
I think the more we align ourselves with the deaf community, hearing community, all stakeholders, there is a responsibility within us as a practice profession to think about why.
Mm-hmm.
Not
I
necessarily
agree.
always that something's wrong or to look back, but just to self-examine why and how it could be different. And if I am in a position to support an ally model and I see that classes to learn sign language are needed, I very well could teach the sign language class myself.
Mm-hmm.
But why would I be doing it when I have such a realization that there's power in that kind of a dynamic? Why is it not that I could maybe find resources of qualified deaf people and bring them to the forefront and say, these are your better models to teach the language. It's their language.
Right.
And if I'm so rural that I may not have good access to language models, why can we not co-teach or partner teach
Yeah.
in an attempt to bring them forward? So I think it's all a structured focus on self to discover where the power balances lie and make
Yeah.
sure that one balance or one power dynamic is not overtaking the other.
Exactly. And this falls into the ethics of interpreting, right? It's not, some people classify it as right versus wrong, whereas in a decision, dilemma, it's usually right versus right,
Mhm.
right? It's just about understanding what values come into play and prioritizing what value, like, is it your personal value or is your professional values that you want to prioritize,
Right,
right? And
right.
so, like, for example, if somebody is offered a job to teach sign language, it's an opportunity, it's a paycheck, right? And it's a venue to use your language and possibly connect with deaf people. So there's a lot of positives to that. But then on the other hand, what you see is the effect is that if you accept the job, it means that someone else, like a deaf person, you're taking that opportunity away from them.
Hmm. True.
Yeah.
Very true.
So in the West, in the States, it's, from what I hear, it's very much a no-no for hearing people to teach sign language.
Yes, that's a very true statement right now. It's become very politicized because it's spreading so fast. And I wouldn't say that many years ago, but a few years ago, it just was being confronted. And there was a
Mhm.
lack of deaf, not necessarily qualified is the wrong words, but credentialed deaf people to be able to teach in the universities. Now they exist.
Mhm.
So now there are no excuses. Deaf people should be able to teach their language.
Yeah, and then that's the challenge here as well. Is there's not a lot of deaf people with credentials that pass the LET, the LET exam, licensure for teaching, and it's kind of a sad situation because the test itself is a barrier because it's in a spoken language, right? And they're not able to pass the exam because they can't access it.
Correct. We have
Yeah,
that
Yeah,
same
right.
struggle. Hmm.
yeah. So, we're talking about ethics in the realm of ethics. And one other issue is confidentiality,
Hmm.
right? And here in the Philippines, what I've noticed is that it's a little bit laxed. Uh, and I think reason being is uh, as part of our Filipino culture, the way we connect with people is to share stories and to talk about certain things, right? And when we talk about our work and we talk about certain deaf people and situations, that is an opportunity for us to connect to each other, right?
Right.
But what is a little bit lost is the level of how much you should communicate. And so maybe we can open that discussion right now about confidentiality here.
What is the meaning of being confidential, and what is its function to us? Because certainly deaf people have privacy, but they may share their stories among themselves. Why is it
Mhm.
more so for me to be
Yeah,
more confidential?
exactly. It's just an understanding of where and when and what information you should keep confidential. Like, for example, for me, anything that I do in terms of if I hear any information during an interpreting session or work, it's kind of I've kind of trained myself to park it somewhere back here and then throw it away because it's kind of you know information shared always comes back to you, right? Because the community is so small. So we have to really be careful about what we share because uh, it might come out that you're a type of person that likes to gossip, and that inhibits that trust, that development of trust with the deaf, which I know that they hold in higher regard as opposed to skill. Like they
Right.
much rather have an interpreter that they totally trust that has skill compared to a really fluent, you know, signer that they can't trust at all.
I'm a little bit not concerned, but I focused on your word, throw it away.
Mhm.
I would maybe suggest something to replace that as demonstrating different tools as how to use the information,
Mhm.
because it's not necessarily that I want to get rid of it, because I need that for the next time that I'm in that situation. I want to leave it here so that I
Mhm.
can bring it forward.
Right.
So I would think that deaf stakeholders in that trusting relationship enjoy the ability to see that this interpreter knows how to use my information, knows how to keep privacy respected, knows how to be confidential in certain situations. But at the
Mhm.
same time, in an information sharing culture, might have access to something that needs to be brought forward. For
Mm.
example, hallway communications in a job interview. Okay, I'm not in the
Right.
room interpreting for the interview per se. I'm in the lobby waiting, but I see coworkers, which I know they're coworkers because they all have the same work badge, discussing, oh, well, I guess we have to go in here and listen to this presentation again. This deaf person, Joe, he always presents stuff we already know. Now, now I'm the withholder of information. What do I do with it?
Mhm.
And those are the things that I think as an ally, we have to be more keen to observe those power imbalances. It may be a great presentation and I can technically interpret it 100%, but there's also side conversations. And even when they go in the room and the coworkers all are around listening, and I'm now more sensitive to a sigh or an eye gaze or a shoulder shrug while I'm working, because I know on the outside that means something, and the coworkers are
Mm.
not necessarily in your favor, and that can affect the interpretation rather than just technically perfect.
Mhm.
Sure, it was, but there's a lot more dynamics because I'm
Right.
privy to those.
That's a great example. And actually, we want to make sure that our viewers, if you have any questions, if you have any stories, if you have any hypothetical situations that you've been in, please feel free to message us, type in your question, and we'll for sure read it so that we can open up the discussion, because we really want to um, get what's really happening on the ground and what issues that really pertain to every one of you guys, so we can really address what's happening currently in the Philippines. So, uh, yeah, the information is there. It's never lost, but it's just a matter of what you do with it. And I guess that throwing away is a little bit of a like for me. I don't use it in a another context besides work, and that's I guess what I meant by throwing away, because for sure any information that will help you in your interpretation will definitely help, right?
Sure. And I know what you mean, but we just have global viewers, so just I'm hypersensitive to words sometimes.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay. What about in Cebu? What is are there any instances or situations that might pop up that you've experienced personally, Miss Ishat, that we can delve into?
At the moment, well, I'd have to think deeper, recall
Mm,
my experiences with. I think I would just like to ask about what Mike said earlier. Well, for example,
mm,
like for me, because there are some times that I hear these type comments, and I'm not so sure what to do about them. Like I can apply what I just heard to my interpreting, but um, am I required or do I have to pass on that comment to the deaf, for example, to um, make him or her more aware of how the feedback from participants or from the audience of this lecture or this presentation that he or she just gave,
I
or
think
do I
that's
have
a
to keep it to
person.
myself?
Well,
mhm.
I think it's a personal decision when it's still hallway conversation, and you're the only one privileged to see it, or hear it,
Mm,
or experience it.
Mhm.
But I think it still colors the interpretation once you go into the meeting and begin to work.
mm,
Now, if that person walks out and joins you and you're walking down the hall and you hear these water fountain conversations, then certainly that's the whole reason that many conferences and workshops want to be ASL only or FSL only,
Mhm.
because deaf people should have access to side conversations in between conference sessions also.
Right.
It's the
I
same
see.
theory of just providing access.
So this also plays into part about boundaries and interpreter boundaries, and when we should, take off our interpreter hat and now I'm Bay, and vice versa. So there's an issue about duty to act, where some interpreters might go over and beyond, because it seems like they're the only ally in the room for the deaf, right? So they have to sometimes, uh, you know fight for them, or say something that is outside of what supposed to be the interpreter role. And so I'm just wondering if you can kind of comment on that, like when is too much, when do you act too much? Mhm.
When you act too much, you've acted too much,
Mm,
whatever that means. Um, I'm trying to think if there's some example that I could give of what might be too much.
mhm,
If I'm constantly volunteering to work, but I call that pro bono,
mhm,
I don't think that's too much. But when I am interpreting a conversation a little bit more locally, that hearing person and deaf person are in the middle of a conversation and one of them wants to interrupt, do I constantly interrupt in favor of the hearing person, or do I
mm,
interrupt in favor of the deaf person? Or who has control of the conversation dynamics? And yes, it can be allyship to make sure that the deaf person has a leg up or has the opportunity to interrupt because they may have not had those opportunities in their experience. So they may not even have adequate time to know that there's a chance to interrupt. Yes, I'll push a little bit more for that.
Yeah.
And cultural rules and dynamics of the conversation will patient interrupt doctor or keep things quiet. So I have to maybe push just a bit in my interpretation to catch that tone of, it's your turn to ask a question. Now would be a great time to ask a question. You're not interrupting. You can interrupt. So I can manage the conversation a little bit just with cues in the work, because even the language itself, I have to hear it, process it, and then do it. You think in a classroom when the teacher turns and says, does anyone have any more questions? By the time that gets interpreted and deaf person thinks, oh, I do, the teacher's already moved on. And usually that question is lost.
Yeah. And that's really what I've noticed here too, because a lot of interpreters feel that their voicing skills are not at par with their signing skills. And because of that issue, they tend to ignore the deaf themselves, like, and tell the deaf, oh, they've moved on to the next topic, or something, where they totally try to purposefully avoid having to voice for them.
What was very common that I saw when I was doing a lot of educational work were questions that looked like this, and I'll sign this little portion. I hear the teacher say, any questions? And it looks like this. I never even acknowledged to my deaf person that they could ask a question. I made it to the group and never even had eye contact.
Right. And
because
sometimes
I'm scared to voice.
Yeah, and that makes a difference, right? Because perhaps that deaf person's comment might change the entire, interaction, and it might, blow up into something bigger, and then the interpreter would have to voice that conversation. So, yeah, it's really hard.
It is. I'm still wanting to go back just a little bit to the credentials for teaching the language.
Okay.
Some of the stakeholders that are secondary or tertiary along the line is the college or university itself. And if you do locate a credentialed, qualified deaf person to teach the language and present that to the hiring committee, HR very much sees that, wow, that's going to be expensive. We're not only hiring a professor, now we're hiring interpreters, staff of interpreters. Wow. So who would HR pick? One hearing person who does not need to rely on interpreting services for their career, or a deaf person who needs to have a team of interpreters constantly for whatever the work is. That's information which I earlier called hallway conversations. That's something I keep in the back of my head is who are the stakeholders and why are they making these decisions?
Yeah.
It's just lots of things to think about.
It's another added barrier, because I think that's one issue that prevents deaf people to be at the table when trying to form systems and contribute to deaf education in the curriculum, is because it's just an extra hassle to have that interpreter in the room. And it's sad. I see there are slight changes, but it's still there. Like there's even recently I was offered to be part of this discussion to talk about teaching sign language, and I specifically told them, well, my specialization is interpreting. I have some deaf people that I could refer you. I sent them their resume, and they still contacted me and said, okay, but we want to talk to just you, right? And I'm still going to go to the meeting, but I'm going to go in as just pay attention, curious eye, just to see what is being said, because it makes me gauge whether or not that this institution is really deaf friendly or really wants to support the deaf community.
Hmm. Exactly.
Yeah, yeah. And so going back to also when you're talking about pro bono work, like I said, there's a lot of interpreters out there, newer interpreters, that feel sometimes that the deaf people are asking them to do interpreting work that's volunteer, and a lot of them don't know where that boundary is because it's more frequent than they want to, but it's hard for them to say no because for whatever reason they feel guilty, or they'll be labeled as without a deaf heart. You know what I mean? So what would you be able to any advice for those interpreters that are in that situation?
Frequently, with this kind of a conversation, I hear things like crossing the boundary or breaking code of ethics. Can they? It's almost like one of Kohlberg's stages of development, that if I do something, I'm going to be punished for it somehow.
Hmm.
If I do too much, they won't like me, they won't hire me, I'll be punished, I'll get stigmatized. And I don't think it has to be that drastic,
Hmm.
but conversations like breaking confidentiality or breaking an ethic, they're not laws, they're concepts. So think about the pro bono work that you're doing. I would say, think of the power dynamics, how it's going to affect stakeholders, and what boundaries are there. Because if it's something that could normally charge to do and afford to pay for it, I don't
Hmm.
know, think of something, a government business, they have money to pay for interpreters, they should pay for interpreters most often. But what are the things that are usually not covered or paid for? Weddings, funerals, things like that, more family reunions. So if I offer pro bono work, I don't necessarily want to do that for a courtroom.
Hmm.
They have money to pay for that. It's already legislated for that. I want to have my services go to things that need me more. But because I have ethics and boundaries and limits and rules and all these things, when I'm at someone's funeral, I want to interpret the funeral. I want to be cordial. I want to be certainly professional, all these things. But I don't want to influence them with my religious beliefs because it's a religious setting or a wedding. Then I'm crossing boundaries at that time, which we mentioned earlier. So is my pro bono work interpreting for a church service?
Hmm.
It's a great thing, but is that my calling? Is that my service to God? Or is that my pro bono work?
Hmm.
Because I really only do it for my denomination, or I only do it for my convenience, then that's not necessarily pro bono.
Right. I think what's happening though is that there are interpreters that it's very difficult for them to say no. So what ends up happening is to go back to the helper model, they try to do everything and anything because they're the only interpreter there in the area, and it leaves them exhausted. Some interpreters are actually have injured themselves because they've interpreted so much for the deaf community, and they don't understand yet how to say no, basically, right? Because again, it's a guilt thing. Like, the deaf person, they don't have anybody, they don't have any interpreter. I'm the only one. It's like, okay, so how do we um, kind of resolve that? How do we talk to the deaf person about pro bono work, and what should be pro bono work and what shouldn't be pro bono work? Do
Can
you
I
have
have
any
you answer
ideas?
that first? Yes.
Ishat, how
Mhm.
would you, in that situation, if you were if a deaf person was constantly asking you to do certain volunteer work, where it shouldn't be volunteer, it should be actually paid, what would you do?
Before, I used to just do it as volunteer work. Like all the work that I used to do in earlier years, I would do it as a volunteer work. But then it was the deaf themselves who actually encouraged me to actually ask for a pay, especially if the organizers of an event or if the agency that I'm interpreting at has the capacity to pay me, then I should actually ask for payment. And sometimes the deaf represent me, and they would be the ones to ask that you have to pay for our interpreter. And so that's also what empowered me to not demand, but to feel that I am that I also have to be paid for my services. But for more personal events like funerals or hospital visits or a checkup or emergencies, those things that it's a matter of assessing the situation or in the capacity of the deaf person requesting your service, because we know that there are a lot of deaf who don't have the capacity. But basically, if it's a personal request, then I would do it voluntarily. I would do it for pro bono. But if it's for an official event sponsored by your organization, or if it's a government agency requesting for an interpreter, then the deaf themselves would tell the organizers or the agency that they would have to pay for my service. So actually, it's not so much of a burden for me to ask for the payment or to ask for a fee, because the deaf do that for me. But in earlier years, when I was just starting out, it's a lot, or like almost all of it were just
Yeah.
voluntary interpreting work.
Yeah.
But
And
you
I think
learn through the years.
go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to ask the consideration of where is the focus, because if I go to a hospital to interpret, certainly they can find the funds to pay me. But if I have a personal request to go to something out of the ordinary, a nutritionist or a holistic medicine kind of an appointment, where it's just single practice and they may not be familiar with how to contract interpreters and things, then if I'm going to focus on myself as an ally, I can ask for payment. I can ask for a varying rate of payment. Or if it's something that it's a cause that I'm into and I support, I could even like donate my funds back. But at least they have the experience of they pay, and I can donate my services by giving the money back. Or is it just something that's very, very personal that is good for the moment, for the community? For example, there's a dying wife in the hospital, and the husband wants to go visit at odd hours or multiple hours. I can be on the team of interpreters to go sit with the dying patient all night long, do 3 or 4 hours of shift as volunteer. I would not charge for something like that. And that could be my pro bono work. So
Right.
I think the whole underscoring of whatever the situation is, that we just look at why.
Hello, are we back? What happened there?
Yes.
Sorry, I think my computer froze. Did your computers freeze?
Yeah.
Okay.
We lost you
So
for a bit.
technical glitch there. But yes, and there's various ways to approach it. You just have to understand the situation, the dynamics, and ask why, like you said. And I remember one instance where a deaf person was asking me to interpret for them for various consultations with the doctor, and it took a lot of my time, right? And I decided to implement some sort of barter system. So if they cannot pay my rate, then we can negotiate something that they can pay that is equivalent, that's worth what my rate is. And it really, uh, in a sense, made them feel better because they knew that they were not, you know, they're not feeling bad because they were taking advantage of me, taking all this time, and they were able to give back, even if it was in some little way. And the one thing that I got was a beautiful picture frame, because this deaf person was a photographer. So he took a picture of my kids, and I ended up with a beautiful picture frame, and I cherished that frame. Like, it was such a great deal for me. So there you go. We have a question actually from Miss Roselle. If we can bring that up. So again, we want to make this as interactive as possible. Ms. Roselle says, guilty here for not being able to say no, because I learned sign language through the support of the church. Thus, I am just paying back, for I believe that this skill have not been given unto me for nothing, but for a reason, for it is needed, and that may serve its purpose.
I think that is noble, and I think it sounds very appropriate to give back to what you were given. Certainly, I don't know if there would be a need for any guilt for that.
Yeah, good point.
I was smiling when you were saying you were being paid by a photo.
Yeah.
I used to be the Tupperware interpreter. I had a deaf person who sold Tupperware and would pay me and would order extra bowls or extra lids. So I had the complete line of Tupperware for a few years.
Yeah, I got paid by pineapples. So I've
been paid by food and meals.
Yeah.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And knowing also that deaf people pay it forward as well. So it's not just you give a service and it ends there. I think there's also that their appreciation being paid forward to others, and you hearing stories about, okay, this deaf person you interpreted for a job, got the job, and now he's actively involved in the community and paying it back to the community. So it makes you have that sense of, okay, yeah, you contribute a little bit to that.
Exactly. That was the church comment just now. I was given a skill. I owe something in respect to the skill that I was given. So yes, I think that's noble.
Yeah, it's just about balance, right? Because sometimes not all deaf people are good people. Like, there are some that will take advantage of the fact that you're a newer interpreter, and they play on that. Oh, come on, have a heart. Please help me here. Please help me here. So you have to just understand where your boundaries lie, right? When doing too much is too much.
Too much.
And
yeah.
I think that leads to maybe a group study or a conversation on context. Because what is the context of the question? Why? Because yes, there may have been motives behind it. And certainly in my day, because I probably interpret for 30, 40, 50 people per day sometimes, in a variety, because I'm in a call center for video relay. I don't know these people. I have no context of the information that they're going to call about. I don't know if it's the first time that they've been exposed to the topic of what we're going to say. But deeper than that, I don't know the context of their background and experience. So I don't know if they grew up well-educated, grassroots. Their interpreters were buy-by models. Their interpreters were helper models. So what will they expect of me now in a call? Because I may approach it in ally mode, or I may approach it in buy-by mode, which was most of my career. But I started my career with helper models, just ending probably about that same time period. So, I mean, I've seen all these conduit models and everything. And I have people today that still call and really just want me to summarize what they just told me on the phone. And it's like, wow, now we're working consecutive. Now we're in a whole nother conduit model. Okay, I can do this. So that's part of the flexibility. And where do I draw out my boundary? My boundaries shift all day long.
Yeah. Yeah, and so for some people, consecutive means like turn taking in terms of interpreting.
Hmm.
Most of the interpreters know simultaneous, where we do it at the same time as the speaker. But consecutive is back and forth, back and forth. So you have that time to process the whole idea. So just giving a little bit of a context there.
Sure,
So
sure.
also in terms of like an allyship and building an interpreting community, like those who are in remote places, how do we support them in building that group of people where they can turn to, where they can find that support? In Cebu, for example, like I'm still not familiar of the entire interpreting situation there. Uh, what's it like as an interpreter in Cebu, Miss Ishat?
I think there are a lot of skilled signers in Cebu, but it's been difficult. We've been trying for a couple of years now to bring everyone together and to just form a community, and a community that works collaboratively with the deaf community. Because I would say that I'm closer to the deaf community than I am with the interpreting community. So it's something that I'd really that me and some interpreter friends would really I really want to come together and do collaborative work with the deaf, but it's just so difficult because um, some of them think that, well, I think there's some are intimidated that some of us have been interpreting for years and they feel that, oh, we're just new in this, we're not as skilled, but we really want to bring them out because um there's this young interpreter here in Cebu, and she's bearing a lot of the burden for interpreting for most of the deaf here because she's the one who's usually available, and she's the one usually referred to by the deaf leaders because she's really good. But I'm really concerned that if she takes in all the tasks, it would exhaust her, and she's still very young. And I don't want to, and it really, we don't want to burden these young interpreters because we see them as they're the future in interpreting. And if we don't spread the task or spread the responsibility amongst ourselves, it would be very difficult. And we'd like to, like, because in Cebu City there's a Tri-City here, and there are other communities of deaf, and we'd like to call in the interpreters in these localities because there are, it's just so difficult. I really don't know how to bring everyone together because I don't know, it might be the distance or it might be the schedule, and it can be a little frustrating, but yeah, we really have that goal in mind of building an interpreting community in Cebu. And I really hope that some of them are watching now and that they would also reach out to us because it really catches, it can't be one way that the deaf always calling for interpreters or me just calling everyone else, or just a group of people trying to, because I know that if I have to count them, I think there are like 30 skilled signers all over Metro Cebu, and that's a very good number. But it's just difficult to bring people together, and that's where I would like to ask, like, how do you build an interpreting community? Because we really need that here.
Hmm. I don't think we have any excuses anymore since Zoom has been created. And
I know, right? But
online, all it
why?
is, all it is a spot on the calendar now.
Mhm.
Today, we will and announce it in advance and say we're going to have a group discussion on any topic, and just pick a date that's like, this is the day we start to meet together, because that's ethical, that you work with your colleagues and professionals, you study, you continue and to get better. So yes, I think, why not do it from online?
Mhm. Yeah, and but it's easier said than done because, like, I mean, what Miss Ishat is saying, there's all these internal noises. Like, there's the
Sure.
intimidation factor. There's I'm not worthy factor. It's like so many. So, what? How would you, basically tell these interpreters to get over it? But how would you say it nicely? Like, how would you, how would you encourage them to really, step out of their own barriers so that you can form this community?
I think that's the role of top down. I think that's the role of Panasli. I think that's the local chapters. I think that's local interpreters. I think those seasoned interpreters that reach out to the younger interpreters, bring them along, invite them, let them work in a safe environment so they feel structured and supported.
Mhm.
And that is pass it on, because like my work, I only see, I don't know, maybe 10, 15 more years before I'll start to slow down. So
Mhm.
I need the younger generation to pick up the pace too.
Yeah.
So I work with my local community organization. But yes, it's the same thing.
Mhm.
Reach out to them and pull them forward sometimes.
Mhm. So you hear that, different communities, we have to reach out and contact each other, contact Pinasli. We have a list of interpreters that we can connect you with if needed, and we're always here to support. So I think we have a question here from Miss Roselle again. Bring that up. Miss Isha, can you read this?
So, what should an interpreter do when during a session notice that most of the audience who are deaf seems not to grasp the topic being discussed by the speaker, which does not bother to check if his or her audience can follow the gist of the talk? Basically, I
So
think it's how or what would the interpreter do if she notices that the deaf aren't don't really get what's being discussed, but the speaker doesn't notice this?
mm, okay.
Is this a formal situation where we tend to think we cannot interrupt the speaker? Or is it more like casual, like maybe a classroom?
Well, in either situation, I think it's also about perception because
Mhm.
as an interpreter, we see the deaf person and we think that they're not understanding or they're not paying attention, and we might think that it's them, but it also could be us as interpreters. We might not be able to interpret it well for them to understand, or it could be the speaker. The
Mhm.
speaker could be just completely boring, right?
Exactly.
And so we have to kind of let go of. So again, it goes back to those models. Like I think what has to, the next thing is, what do we do? Do we stop the speaker? Do we tell the deaf person? Do we just keep interpreting? Again, we have to know more information in order to make a sound decision. But those are
So,
the things. Yeah.
Ishat, that question, what do you perceive that question to be more of which model? Does that sound like a helper model or a conduit model or a bye-bye model question?
I think the question would be I probably the helper model because the interpreter just was more focused on the deaf being able to understand the discussion, and so the interpreter just wants to really let the deaf absorb the information that was given. But the concern really was for the deaf if they are able to get that information.
And on the opposite side, the speaker may not want the audience to participate. So it
That would be
works.
Yeah.
And it's working as planned, it's just uncomfortable. Or it could be conduit model, the question, and I'm just expressing words. That's all I'm doing. I'm not responsibility. I have no responsibility for grasping the concepts and understanding. That was one of the failures of conduit model, which led to bye-bye model, which means I need to adjust my language. I need to make it more culturally appropriate. I need to mediate something. Can I ask questions? I'm no longer invisible. I'm a part of the conversation because I'm in the room. So now I have to go back inward and find, am I expressing the audience tone by asking all the questions? Am I expressing the looks and facial information that says, I'm not really getting this. I don't understand. Is that being conveyed to the speaker? So you can see the same question through different models, which could be a group activity sometimes when you host this in Cebu next month.
Yeah,
It,
hopefully
those kinds of things, it's when I say pull them forward and you work together as a team, afterwards, take 5 minutes just to discuss post session. What did you think about it? How did it work? And those can be feedback questions. How did it feel? How did it go?
Alright.
Yeah. So let's look. Here's another question. It was discussed earlier that there is no such thing as a perfect interpreting model. So how did we come up with allyship or being an ally as an improved model compared to earlier models?
Allyship is a very strong focus on power, power dynamics, and even take it out of deafness, social injustice, Black Lives Matter, all the things we see politically, um, immigration, all of that. Where do you align yourself with? Pick one for now, immigration. And what am I doing? What is my myopic viewpoint on one, immigration in general, immigration of certain groups, and to be aware of my privilege, to be aware of my biases, and be able to control those before I accept an assignment and go work. For example, I would not go and work in an immigration setting at the passport office if I have such strong biases. And what does it do to my language, to my activities, to my professionalism to know that I may or may not have such strong biases? How can I be willing and flexible to draw an appropriate boundary if I harbor such bias?
Right. It brings an interesting thing to mind because I know that there are church interpreters out there that interpret in the community, and they will refuse to interpret certain subject matter and will refuse to interpret music or anything to do with even like the national anthem because of their faith. So it brings that question about, if you're a true ally, you have to be asking yourself why before you even accept that work, right? Is it something that you can do, or are you willing to faithfully interpret everything so that the deaf person can access it? And if not, then perhaps it might be a good idea to give it to somebody else. But a lot of the time, I think interpreters are just put in a situation where they don't have any
There
prep
is
work.
no anyone else.
Yeah, there's no anyone else, and they're just in there, and then all of a sudden they're put in a situation where their internal they have yet to process what's happening with them internally, and so it's just turning into a major block.
Which is why I go back to the earlier phrase of this not being thrown away. If I find some position to anchor my belief, to anchor my core values, to anchor a bias, while I'm working, I discover a new trigger and I react to it some way. That has to get put somewhere, and it has to stay there in case that trigger comes up again sometime.
Right.
For
Thank
example,
you.
if I do medical things, okay, I'm a good medical interpreter.
Walking
But if I
balls.
don't do blood very well, then how can I be functioning as a medical interpreter? Because the potential to see blood is so prevalent.
Right.
So those I have to like really spend time alone with myself to consider whatever assignment it is that's coming at me and know in case this happens, how would I act? Because I know that could come up.
Mm, yeah. So understanding your limits, knowing your capacity, that's part and parcel of being an ally. So and like I said, it's just that a lot of people haven't yet done, like, they've done their work in terms of signing, and they're great signers, but there's other components of interpreting that they also have to work on, right? And it's about having that emotional awareness, and ability to mask it if needed or access it if you want to convey some sort of feeling.
So I was interpreting one time for surgery, and it was eye surgery. And the eye really does not go to sleep during surgery. Lens replacement, things like that. I was kind of new. I was fine. And the doctor turned to me, getting ready for the procedure, to say, "Are you okay?" Sure, I'm good.
Mhm.
Until the needle went in into the eye socket to deaden it,
Yeah.
which I did not really enjoy, but I was curious.
Mhm.
But then as we were pushing in the medicine, rolled it around a little bit to make sure it got
Oh
to
my
all
God.
parts. Yeah,
Even
okay.
I'm feeling
That was, didn't need that. That was my limit. So those are the kinds of things that I think of, that what did I do? What did I react? And now that I can go back and discuss it, what did deaf person think of watching me have a reaction? Was my reaction tolerable? Was it normal? Was it fun? I'm human. That was a bit much. What did the doctor think? Oh, there's another person who's not capable to do this, because I knew it was going to happen. That's why he rolled it in the first place, was to see if I would have a reaction. Probably because he was that
yeah,
tricky.
yeah,
So I was a participant in those moments with normal reactions. Had I been stoic and said, "No, you're fine,"
mhm,
then that would have been an inappropriate reaction, probably. So
right,
I think when I say predict or pre-session or pre-conferencing, when you go into things, those are conversations to have with your team, with yourself on the way. That if you're going into a family counseling situation, anything could come up. And what are my triggers? Because it's family counseling. I have to be
mhm,
ready for that. What will happen if whatever topic comes up that I know sets me off, or I might lose my balance for some reason?
right. So to get that I thing out of my head, maybe we can take a little bit of a switch in direction. So, sir, do you know in the Philippines we have what's called hugot lines? You know what hugot lines is?
No.
So, Miss Ishat, what does hugot mean?
I'm sorry. Well, hugot
As you
is
drink,
well, literally means to draw something out, but
to
the
pull it
hugot
out.
lines to pull it out.
Yeah.
But here in the Philippines, there's a trend among, well, young and even not so young people, that they have these. It's like lines from the heart, something that it may be applicable to other situations, but it's actually referring to how they feel. And most of the
Mhm.
time, it refers to feelings of hurt, or heartbreak, or stuff
Mhm.
like that. So yeah,
So it's
that's
kind
our
of like
hugot line.
words of wisdom. It's some they sometimes have a play on words. Sometimes it's almost poetic. So I'm encouraging, I know that we have some viewers out there that have all these questions that they want to ask, and I'm trying to get them to start banging on the keyboard and ask us these questions. But maybe also, if you have a hugot line that you want Sir Jojo or Sir Lester to interpret, because we know how easy it is to interpret these hugot lines, please send them to us. And we will definitely have a discussion about message analysis a little bit if you want to know how to sign certain hugots. Ikaw, Miss
Wow,
Isha,
interesting.
do you have any hugot lines to give to us?
Ah, well, I usually come up with hugot lines randomly, so when I'm asked, they just disappear. So
Sapir.
maybe later I'll think of something.
How about you,
Yeah.
Sir Mike? Do you have any words of wisdom or any hugot lines?
Only the ones that I used last time was stop and smell the roses.
Stop and smell the roses. Let's see how that's signed. Wow, beautiful. I actually have a hugot line. It's in Tagalog though, and we'll see how it works out. So, ang tunay na alay ay meron inaalay. So it's like a play on
Oh
words on
wow.
ally is to provide something. So a true ally is someone that provides. I thought about that. I thought it was cute.
You planned it.
That's a very good
I
one.
did.
Actually, that's a very good one. That is
I
a good one.
I know. I was thinking of some things to say. What can I say about ally? I actually it's a Tagalog word ally. I can put those together.
Oh, wow. Really?
Yeah.
That's good.
So, do we have any questions from the audience? Do we have any comments? Do we have anybody that wants to say hi? Go ahead, Miss
Okay,
Ishat.
this one's from Miss Ju Virata. I once interpreted for a wedding of a deaf couple from the church ceremony up to the reception. It was a pro bono service and sorry, and I was not even close friends with the couple. Even after the event, I had a terrible back pain and I thought of sending a bill for my muscle pain medications. Lol. I just realized it was planned event. It was fancy. They hired suppliers, paid for almost everything, even for the waiters and parking attendants, but not for the interpreter. That's sad.
Mhm. Yeah.
Ugh.
So, what do you do?
Chalk
Do
it up
you?
to experience and ask for things in advance.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Always negotiate and figure out what the
Yeah.
expectations are.
Mhm.
But it's also a sad thing because the effect of that, Sir Charlon, hi, watching from Jensen, hi, Sir Charlon. The sad thing about that is that Miss Ju uh, will most likely not want to interpret for that person again because she felt a little bit taken advantage of,
Right.
right? So it goes both ways, right? If we feel that we weren't in the right, or we were somehow uh, not seen as worthy enough to have pay, even though the everyone else, all the services had pay, then it just leaves a bad taste in the mouth.
And a bad taste is fine. And I don't mean to be flippant or sarcastic, but like when I say chalk it up to experience, that can't be my defining moment that I end my career over one experience. Because there will
Mhm.
be other weddings, there will be other opportunities for the same people. And certainly, everyone that is a customer is not necessarily right. Things happen. Next time, I know to negotiate something in advance, but what I'm negotiating is all weddings or
Mhm.
all events. I'm not negotiating against one person because that
Right.
doesn't support the greater good of the profession.
Yeah.
So, if I were to have a team to do some event with this person again, then that's information I might want to discuss with my team. Is
Mhm.
I've had a similar experience in the past. I've done a wedding like this with these same people. Just to let you know, I may have certain reactions or biases or triggers. I want you to watch for that and make sure that I'm staying neutral
Yeah. But
without disclosing what happened before, because that's a privacy issue. That's the
mm,
confidentiality part.
yeah, but that's actually, to be honest a little bit, with Filipino culture, that's the information that we would share, right? They didn't pay me.
Mm.
It's so easy to say, like,
It
you
is
know what I
easy
mean?
to
Yes.
say.
Yeah,
Actually, yeah.
yeah, and and we might not even realize it, right? That might be something that will cloud, like, if we tell our other interpreters, well, this happened to me, then all of a sudden that will affect how they interpret on
Yes.
stage, and it will affect the entire event, right? It will cloud the whole situation, and that's
Exactly.
something that we want to avoid for sure.
Exactly.
Okay, do we have any other questions? Ms. Clea, our deaf community or organization have the right to choose our preferable interpreter because we know their capacity to access a general service. However, we know some interpreter who related to the church or religion services that is not part of familiar community service. Should we refuse to comply with their request? So I think they're asking is there is an interpreter that's kind of outside. I don't want to say it's an outsider, maybe. They don't know this person, and let me read this question again. However, the interpreter is the interpreter not part of the church? Is that what they're asking, Miss Isha?
I think so. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
It is someone from the outside, and if they
not
could
from the church
refuse,
denomination. Okay.
yeah,
That's what I read into the question too, is the phrase, we have the right to choose the kind of interpreter that we want. I say, certainly you do. But at the same time, if that limits the pool of interpreters, there may be some give and take there. But it is certainly a right to limit the interpreters that I would want to use for my function. And there also are businesses, agencies that may have designated in-house interpreters that are hired on staff. And that interpreter works with an outside team to come support them for longer sessions. So you have one well experienced with all the government terminology that might come up. Great. That seasoned interpreter or that in-house staff interpreter now has a double duty to kind of watch the team interpreter and feed them with lots of terminology and background, because it's just helping manage the day for them. So yeah, certainly they have a right to have somebody with the kind of experience that they need. I would support that.
Yeah. We also have to think about the context of limit the limit of our limitations. There's so very few of us interpreters out there, right? In the Philippines, and I think it's on the side of community building, maybe it would be beneficial to at least invite this person in just to see what
yeah,
they're all about, if they're willing to, if they understand the church and their services and what they're are they willing to sign music, that kind of thing. uh, just to keep the doors open, just to not exclude somebody based on something that you have a perception of. You perceive them as a certain faith, so they're not applicable to our faith. So because sometimes like the best interpreters are of non-denomination, for example, right? So they're it just all depends, and in line to fostering connections and community. Maybe that's something that we can think about as well.
And why can the interpreter that is the outsider or foreigner not interpret the more religious sections of the day, of the function? Why not the fellowship, maybe the outside kind of activities, but quote high church be for the designated interpreters of preference?
For sure. Yeah, there's always so many different ways to break down the work, right? And even if somebody is honest enough, oh, I can't do the songs, be it they're too afraid to do the songs, or they're against the religion, then we have to also respect that, right? And okay, well, let's give you the homily. We'll give you the like you said, the fellowship or something.
I can give you a little bit of a personal story about church interpreting. A lot of my training was church and religious schools and preaching schools. And we always had the new interpreters do the prayers and music, but the seasoned interpreters did the sermons.
Mm-hmm.
Until it got questioned one day, guilty. Why do the deaf participants why are they not able to see the seasoned interpreters do the songs or do the prayers? Why can't a novice interpreter do the sermon also? It needs to be mixed up, because are we not placing more value on the sermon than the music or on the prayer.
Mhm.
So yeah, that
Yeah.
came up a few times.
What happened?
The seasoned interpreter didn't always do the sermon.
Okay. But was there I mean was there a
I, I,
change? Did it
I pulled a few forward.
okay.
I pulled a few of the novices forward and said, today you get to do the sermon.
Okay. That's
With
good.
help,
And
of
then
course. I'm here to help. I'm right in front of you. I'll feed you everything that you might need or miss, but you get to be on stage today.
that's good. So let's see. We don't have any questions at the moment. Miss Ishat, do you have any questions for Sir Mike? Not at the moment. Putting you on the
Um,
spot.
I just like to ask, for
Timeline.
example, because in the Philippines, it's quite there's this whenever an outside, well, for example, like the situation that they gave earlier, for an organization or the organizers have selected or have hired an interpreter, and then the deaf participants also have their preference of an interpreter. Um, in the Philippines, it's what happens based on my experience. Most of the time, if for example I'm the preferred interpreter of the deaf participants, it's it's kind of difficult. It would be difficult for us to actually work with the new interpreter, especially because we are usually not given enough time to prepare together or to team up.
Mm.
So I just like to ask what would be the best way to resolve that. For example, we're coming from different organizations, coming from different groups, and because sometimes some of the deaf would also like no, don't interpret because they're the they're the ones picked by the by the organizers. So you don't have to do your job. Let them do it because they're the ones chosen by the organizers. So it's kind of there's a dilemma for interpreters who were picked by the deaf coming. It's quite difficult to confront or to just come forward in that event. So I'm just like to ask, how do we resolve that situation, or that it's kind of it's sometimes intense.
Mhm.
So I just like to ask for help on those
May,
situations, for example.
what is the dilemma? That would be
Well,
my
it's
first
like,
question.
for example, I would want to interpret for the deaf because I know that I can communicate better with them, but at the same time I'm not the one hired by the organizers. Like the deaf brought me with them for that event, but I wasn't officially hired for that event. So there's a problem. There's kind of a question of courtesy to the interpreter hired, but at the same time, my responsibility for the deaf who also brought me with them.
So can you be involved as an ally? Can you be involved with the pre-conferencing, the team support, the post-conferencing afterwards, those dialogues where your deaf participants can be involved? Maybe you could have them ask questions and feedbacks, and you could simply mediate the conversations because you're involved. You know what the topic should look like as interpreted, so you can maintain that during the work. If you see something, feed them. For example, we just talked about church, so that's on my mind. What's the sign for soul? Soul, soul, or soul. And you'll see different versions. And then a new interpreter may not know what the proper sign is. So that's something you can feed in your cultural context, that you hold that information. This is what we sign here for this, which is common like
Mm-hmm.
in the denominations for baptism. There's baptism, baptism, baptism. I mean, there's many different kinds. So the interpreter may not know subtleties like that, and you can participate by helping them with the subtleties. And then afterwards, or even sometimes bridge the conversations with the deaf viewers watching it and say, did you get the message from what was interpreted in a little post session? And you can function as a mediator some.
Yeah, because in that situation, I think
Alright.
if they hired an interpreter for that reason, then we should, uh, let them do their work, right? And but even though you're close to the deaf and they understand you better, it's an opportunity to kind of see to grow, for a better word. So now that you understand that there's a certain dynamics, then you can ask the deaf person or deaf people, how would we improve the situation? What actions would we take in order to address what are the issues? Not specifically that it's this interpreter, but what are the issues outside of the situation, the whole setup that might be of value to the organizers, so that for next time, uh, you know, they might consider uh, having another team, or having deaf people involved in the conversation, something like that. I don't know.
And applaud the positives that they did hire out, that they did recognize it's time to start contracting with more people than
Yeah.
just everything depending on you. And
Yeah.
we face that here locally with agencies that, for lack of better words, don't necessarily have the best interpreters. And they send their interpreters to high stakes appointments. There's a need for that feedback to get to the agency or to the doctor's appointment or to the courts. Say, these people that you keep having come in there are not acting professionally. They may be certified at a basic level, but they're not able to handle high stakes interpreting. And I realize you've written a contract with agency 1 or agency 2, but at the same time, in the next time that contracting comes up, or if you can maybe find some way to break your contract, the whole deaf community will be better off. Those are conversations that do come up sometimes.
Yeah, it's a little bit of a sad situation here, because for hearing organizers, they don't care. They just want to fill the quota of, we've provided an interpreter, but we don't, like, since they're not privy to understanding them or knowing what the service is all about, they fulfilled their duty. So you know what I mean. And
Right. They don't
it's
know
hard.
enough to care, and they don't know how to care. They think
Yeah.
they're caring most
Exactly.
often. That's been my experiences. They think they're providing service just because they see hands moving.
Hmm. Okay, so it seems like we have a terp who got.
Yay.
Let's see that. Miss Ishat, can you read it for me? Can you read it? No.
Pag-ibig ko sa'yo ininterpret para sa bingi, ngunit hanggang ngayon ako'y iyong isinasantabi.
Wow, who got? Ta-da-ta-ta-ta-ta.
Pag-ibig. Oh,
How would you explain that? How would you explain that?
I had to read it again
Okay,
because
let's see.
it was so long.
If you can't
Okay,
say
Sir
it,
Charlon
just
has a
okay.
hugot as well. Okay, so
Okay,
let's go
okay.
back.
Let's go back. Let's go back.
Pag-
Pag-ibig ko sa'yo, ininterpret para sa
Okay.
bingi. Ngunit hanggang ngayon ako'y iyong
Ngunit hanggang ngayon ako'y iyong sinasantabi. It's like,
It rhymes.
certainly it rhymes.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if it's for the deaf or
But kasi we don't know who is sa'yo. Pag-ibig ko sa'yo, ininterpret para sa bingi.
yeah.
Ngunit hanggang ngayon ako'y iyong...
There's like 3 people involved in this.
Yeah.
Right? Like the interpreter, the deaf, and the person
You're
who
interpreting.
we refer.
Yeah.
Who gave this?
So So
Who said this?
you're interpreting for the deaf, and it seems like you love them, but in the end, they just put you on the corner, just like inset on the corner. You know, like they put baby in the corner. Maybe that's why. Isang tabi sa isang side. They put you on the side, like an
Huh.
interpreter. I get it! Yay! I got it now.
Is that really what it means? No, like I didn't get the word play though. Sorry.
Well, yeah, I guess I
Okay.
just focused on isang tabi. So that's where we are as interpreters. We're
Yeah.
on the side somewhere. So, Sir Charlotte, if you can't say it, just sign it.
Yeah. Sometimes that works for me. Like sometimes I just like to share. Sometimes when I have a conversation with people and there's something that I really want to express, but it's easier for me to just sign it than to say it because I can't find the word to say about what I'm feeling or what I want to of the idea that I want to convey. And I just end up
Mhm.
signing it. And sometimes I do that at home and then my siblings would say, why are you signing? We're not deaf. Because they don't understand sign language. So sometimes it that happens that it's for us interpreters or for us who know how to sign, we're able to express ourselves or our thoughts and our ideas or our feelings better when we
Yeah,
are signing. I think that's
yeah.
the advantage of knowing sign language.
Yeah, and one also thing is that because deaf culture tends to be more direct, when we sign something, we are very direct, right? To the point. Whereas if
Yeah.
we speak something or we want to try to say something, we try to find the right word, what's called paligoy-ligoy.
Be more polite.
Yeah, be more polite. So it's just like it's hard to find the right saying. So let's just sign it. Just let's be straight.
Yeah.
Let's be frank. Yeah. So my
Language will always come out. And if you
mhm.
have access to more than one language, you will find what you need in whichever language and present that first. That's how the brain works.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Right. Right.
Miss Joy has a comment. Or question?
Okay.
What do you do when you are caught in a situation wherein you see discrimination within the disability movement happening right before your eyes, and you are tasked to interpret the discussion where the deaf participants are not able to stand up for themselves? Interesting question. What would you do, sir?
Very common. And I think while I am in the situation, it's I don't know if we could call it a duty to act, but I should make that visible. I should make the discrimination visible so that the receiver of the discrimination is able to react appropriately. I can't necessarily judge that yet. I have what I consider a response, but it's not my duty to respond just yet. I think for a greater good, I should let my deaf person have the opportunity to respond
Mhm.
because it very well could be that I want to explode, but my deaf consumer may choose not to, may be well aware that they're being taken advantage of, being discriminated against. But this is the only doctor that knows this certain subject, and I just have to put up with it because I'm getting treatment here. Whereas in
Mhm.
another situation, fully capable of making their own defense.
Mhm.
And I don't know that. So our first steps, I think, is to make it visible and then watch the reaction. And if there is no reaction, then it falls back on me as still in bye mode
Right.
to offer some type of a mediation and see if it's something that's maybe there's misunderstanding. But blatant discrimination, yes, I think the first reaction is to make it visible, make sure
Mhm.
everyone's privy to it.
Right. Miss Ishat, did that ever happen to you before?
Um, Not that I know of. Not that I
Yeah.
remember.
It could actually be little
Thankfully.
things. It could be little things. It's when here people continually refer to deaf people as hearing impaired, right? Signing hearing impaired. There's some people that cover it
Yeah.
up. Like I've seen interpreters cover up signing hearing impaired because they know it's going to cause a reaction, right? So, and it's also when somebody is talking to directly to the interpreter, right? So, oh, interpreter, can you do this? Interpreter, can you do that? And sometimes the deaf person, the interpreter is kind of just, not conveying that the person is talking to the interpreter. It doesn't even give the deaf person the opportunity to react or stand up for themselves. So we just have to be mindful. We have to watch it. And if I was to be put in that situation, yeah, as an ally, I think you just have to find the right way of acting as an ally, like as an interpreter, where I'm facilitating the communication. Let's focus on that first, and then afterwards, if there's a break, if there's something, then we can have a discussion with the deaf person. Did you understand what I said? Because they said this, or do you know what it means? Blah 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 blah. Just in case, maybe it's above or lost to them what was being said, right? Was discriminatory. So
Mhm.
finding that way to find the balance, not making a scene and causing you stop that, like, you know what I mean? Just
If
uh,
if I may I link the comments?
sure.
Because what I mean by making it visible and taking what you mean by hearing impaired, if I see it and it's a slip of the tongue and they didn't necessarily mean it, maybe I can sign hearing impaired and it would be
Mhm,
okay.
mhm,
I have in
Mhm.
my day certainly tell him, tell her all day long. And if they're rural or inexperienced, one or two of those, I know it's not intentional. They mean well.
mhm,
But if it becomes persistent, then I bring light to it. So
yeah,
hearing impaired, if it's meant clearly an intentional way to demean them or uh, to focus on the medical model, I can change this, which may not have much reaction because it is a direct language, to
mhm,
hearing impaired, an
mhm,
older sign, which evokes more emotion.
mhm,
Then it's like, I'm not impaired.
mhm.
Good. That's what we were hoping for.
Right.
Now's your
So
chance to react.
mhm. It's just
And the
sometimes
same with,
hard.
sorry, it's the same with like tell him, tell her.
Mhm,
Once or twice, I can even tell them, okay,
mhm,
and those aren't offensive. But if I can adjust my language to make it more visible as
mhm. Right.
now it looks a little more sensitive and personal and hello, I'm in the conversation. Now the
Mhm.
reactions can start appropriately and fairly.
Yeah. Because knowing Miss Joy, she's an ally to the community. She's an advocate, and it's sometimes hard. It's as an interpreter to see oppression happening right before your eyes, and you're left to feeling stuck because you don't know what to do. You don't know whether or not to say something, or do you remedy the situation, because all of a sudden, if you, the interpreter, start to fix things, then perhaps people will have a different view of interpreting. For example, oh, is that their role? Is that what they're supposed to be doing?
Mhm.
And it gives a kind of a false sense of, okay, this is what an interpreter is supposed to be. Whereas um, if you are a little bit more subtle and be an ally, but not so direct, like you're supposed to understand both cultures, right? So facilitate that, the two
Mhm.
cultures of, yeah.
And I can do that in my own discourse, in my own decisions, even the sign for ally. What is the better sign for ally? I don't know. It's commonly spelled ally, but when if I
Mhm.
talk to someone and it's used in conversation about trying to align myself, then I can be very careful and have my allyship be equal
Mhm.
rather than to be something and I just carelessly sign it
Mhm.
as ally.
Mhm.
Now, what privilege? Because visually, what privilege you're coming down to my level and it
Mhm.
looks way off. And I certainly did not mean that.
Yeah, exactly. So it brings on a good question about what is a good interpreter? Like, how would you define what a good interpreter is? Because we all have all these different definitions. They have to be this, they have to be skilled, they have to be ethical. But what do you think? Do you have to be sort of bipartisan? Like, you have to be a representative of both cultures to be, because you're interpreting both languages, right? So, what do you think?
I think you have to be fluent, and I think you have to be neutral, and I think you have to be willing and open and free to accept criticism, free to accept the dark shadows that lurk within and without, and be open to honestly looking at your role, because you're not a banker counting
Mhm.
money in a safe. You're in someone's life. You're in several people's lives. And there's a lot of conversations about stakeholders. If my action today is simply one thing, to be mindful of allyship, to recognize I have privilege, to act in a way that makes other people I haven't even seen yet, and
Mhm.
that's all because of how I act today, then I think I'm a better interpreter. Because at
Mhm.
least I recognize things are happening around me, and I'm not
Mhm.
just robotically, stoically moving words.
Right. And I think that's one thing that many interpreters have to really take a closer look at is that it's a journey. It's an inward journey.
Mhm.
Mm, and a lot of the times, like when we accept feedback, for example, it's a very, very difficult thing because our egos are so fragile sometimes, right? But it's a necessary thing in order to grow. And I think also part of being an ally is figuring out how to manage that. How are you able to process that feedback in a constructive way so it doesn't uh, be, like you said, who it defines who you are, right? It's just something that you can use to help you do a better job for the next time, that kind of thing. A lot of interpreters struggle with that because you just tell them, oh, that's the wrong sign, or there's a better sign for that, and I was like, I'm the worst interpreter in the world. How could I sign it that way? I'm so sorry. And you know just something we should think about as a community, more of, because it would really help.
And celebrate the positives, because certainly in an hour's worth of language moving, something was good. It doesn't have
Hmm.
to all focus on what signs you did wrong, what concepts were clear, what things were productive. Did they get the message? Was it clear overall? And those can be our topics, because I can give you a 2-hour conference call. You get the job, you got your bonus, everybody was happy, the world smiled in a beautiful color, but I didn't get a thank you.
Hmm.
Ah, oh, why? When did it turn back on me? Why did
Hmm.
I need to have my ego stroked? I
Yeah.
can find my own celebration of positives. Deaf person got a job. Deaf person got a high level job. Got a
Hmm.
bonus even. I did a
Yeah.
good job. I can stroke my own ego later. That's not
Exactly.
about the work.
Yeah. I think we have a question from the audience. It's, so, Miss Ju, learning sign language is a blessing. I get to talk back to hearing people without them knowing it. Yeah. Actually, I love the situation when you're with deaf people and you're signing with them, and then the hearing people are talking about you guys, and then you're signing what they're saying, and then they don't even know. I love it.
Hmm.
Yeah.
I like
Oh,
that I can talk through the window in the car or the shop and just talk to people and don't have to get up. I like being able to talk
yeah.
underwater if I go swimming. Yes, of
Mhm.
course. It's convenient.
Yeah.
and not having to go near a person to communicate, because you can just communicate even from afar. So that's very convenient now with physical distancing and all these um, protocols to just keep a distance from people. So I think the deaf were cool with social distancing before it became a trend.
Mhm.
Yeah. So we have another comment here. Let's see. I know we have
Okay, so
already an app for the FSL. However, can we update it for the benefit of those interpreters who are used to ASL, since the Filipino deaf are telling us to be familiar with FSL?
hmm. Hmm,
So we have an app for FSL. Are they talking about the FSL Buddy?
I think so. I think that's it.
Yeah, and with the whole FSL ASL issue in the community, FSL is a language. The F in FSL is Filipino. It's the person, right? It doesn't relate to Filipino language, right? And in Filipino Sign Language, it has influences in ASL. It has influences in SEE. It's ingrained in the language. It's part of the language. And I think that's where a lot of people think that it's just I don't know, that there's one that's better than the other, and it's not. They're both the same. They're both but there's a little bit of a misunderstanding about the use of ASL here in the Philippines, because they people think that we sign ASL words, that becomes ASL, right? But if you see an actual native ASL user from the States or from Canada, from the West, you can see that they're signing completely differently, right? And uh, like I said, ASL and SEE is part of FSL. It's something that will not delegate from it, right? So we just have to understand that, and kind of recognize that when we're learning FSL, that there are ASL words that coincide with FSL, right? And just having that
Yes,
recognition, because I think
I
there's still a
I
confusion
remember.
about. Mhm.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
I remember just last week, teachers were having this training about FSL, and I think it's one of the first FSL training that's been given to teachers. And some of my teacher friends were asking, because I've been in the community for a while, and they were asking, is FSL difficult? Like, because we don't know FSL, and how different is it from ASL? And I say it's actually more or less the same, because like what Sir Bai said, ASL and SEE has influenced FSL. So there's not much well, in terms, if they're referring to the signs, there's not much difference in the words in the signs, but it's basically on how we sign it. So
Hmm.
I think that's something that we have to understand, because it's not like ASL is not just one thing
Hmm.
that's different or separate from FSL. Like there's a lot of signs that are the same. So I
Hmm.
think that's something that we have to open up our minds about. And basically, when you look at it, there's a lot of influence from ASL
Yeah.
coming into FSL. So it's not because we're using Filipino sign language that our words are Filipino.
Hmm.
Because when we sign here in the Philippines, we still say good morning, and we still say it using English
FSL.
words.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
have I think there's that misconception about the whole FSL ASL thing.
Yeah. There's some actually people who are, they say they're signing ASL, but they're actually signing FSL, right?
So
Because
yes,
they
yes, yes.
it's just they think, like I said, they sign certain specific words in it, but they're actually using FSL really well, actually, because they're able to talk to the Filipino deaf community. And if the Filipino deaf community understands you, then you're most likely signing FSL to them.
We
Yeah.
have the same
So
predicament here.
yeah.
ASL is a continuum and the language changes. And the more technical that the language becomes, the more we have to go on source language of English to find ways to mediate that for a while. Like COVID, where did that come from? We need a word for it. It doesn't need to be something formal, but now it comes out into a sign. And a lot of the signs, even though they're the same, might look differently. Like community.
Mhm.
ASL community, is it a city? That's not a community. So you have a strength in FSL with community, which exists in ASL. Group, moving together still works. The concept is there.
Mhm.
However, it's formed is not necessarily the whole message. You see the movement and you know what it means.
Right. Exactly. So I think we have a few more questions. Ms. Ishat?
Sir, natutulang po ako mag-sign ng basic. Natuto lang po ako mag-sign ng basic sign language via YouTube. How can I improve it if we don't have deaf in my community? Wait. They're asking that. Oh, this comment says she or he learned sign language through watching YouTube. So how do we improve? And she's asking if how they can improve it if there is no deaf in the community or if they don't know any deaf person in the community.
I think YouTube is a great medium. Maybe there's a way that Pinasli could just film deaf language samples, film deaf models. That gives jobs to deaf people as well, to be language mentors, language models. So you fill a topic session for healthcare and get someone to talk about healthcare.
We lost Ishat there, but I'm sure Tech will get her back there. So, and I think what we can also do is put the Facebook page of the Filipino deaf vloggers, because if you really want to connect with the deaf community, and they come from all over, you can't say that there's no deaf people in your community, because they're everywhere. We can put a link in the Pinasti website for the deaf vloggers, and basically what they do is they just rant online, and it's a good way to practice your receptive skills actually, and get a sense of the language, how it's evolving, that how new technologies are emerging. So it's interesting to see their signs for these technologies, for example. And we'll do that for you as well, so you can also connect with some deaf people. Maybe put a blogging yourself, like just sign like, hello, I'm a hearing person and I'm looking for a deaf community here in my area of wherever. And deaf people, like I said, it's a small world, and they'll hook you up. They'll introduce you to somebody in your area, so you can start building a community there. So good question. I think we have a last question from Salvo. What's the best way to improve sign language skills? Very good question.
What do you
Practice with the
suggest?
deaf.
Practice with the deaf. Be involved with the deaf community.
Yeah. There's only so much you can do from books and videos, but if you're not applying the language, not using it in real conversations, then you lose it. And I've talked to a few interpreters that are struggling in this area of improving their signing skills, and it's just a matter of using the language with real deaf people, right?
And the only way you get better is by exposure. So
Yeah.
if the more deaf people you see in a variety, even if it's one topic, talking about happiness, what makes you happy, and see how deaf people react and how they answer it.
Yeah.
Compare those and store those, and just, okay, it's a little bit of a planned conversation, but I'm trying to get better. I'm watching how deaf people sign, the variety of things for even the simplest of concepts.
Yeah. And as an interpreter mentor, I would also suggest that you videotape yourself signing. So a lot of the time, people aren't even aware of how they sign. So if you just have your cell phone, your camera, videotape yourself signing to something, and looking at yourself signing just to see where your skills are at and where you need to improve at. Because a lot, like I want to learn how to sign, but what do I do? There's so many ways. It's just a matter of figuring out how to use technology, how to involve yourself with the community, and and come to events like this, like Foreign Terps, like TerpTalks. We always have a FSL interpreter, like Sir Lester here on the side. Uh, but he looks like he's like monochromatic now. He's like black and white. Anyway, so we have various ways for you to learn sign language, but more importantly, it's connecting with people, right? Either interpreters or deaf people. So that being said, what a great discussion we had today. It was full of meaningful, deep, concepts that we will definitely bring forward. Do you have any final messages for us, Mr. Magic Mike?
Keep growing and keep working at it, because it's a practice profession, and certainly the more opportunities you have to interpret, the better you get.
Yeah, wise words. And yes, we will definitely keep at it. Pinasli is here for you to help you in terms of finding these, little glimmers of professional development. And you can always email us anytime, any day. Just click on our site, our Facebook page, and we'll just move forward from there. So with that, thank you, Sir Mike, for. Oh, we have one more comment here. Allyship builds relationship, fosters friendships, moving forward together in one ship. Yeah, who got? Because we're all from the same boat.
Nice
We're
one,
all
Sir
the same
Jojo.
ship. Yeah, nice one, Sir Jojo. Good one.
Yeah.
So we have no
And
any more.
I think what's
Okay.
interesting, sorry, like what's interesting about this topic is for personally for me coming into this topic right now, I just thought that I would learn how to connect, like go outwards from me and bringing people in, or how to connect with communities or people. But a lot of the work of allyship, or it really has to start from within, and I think that's how we can bring people in as well. If they see our intent, our motives, and our purpose, then they would also feel that, and that's the best way for us to encourage them to join the community or to build this relationship.
I
Yes,
So
agree.
totally
I'm
agree.
very, very grateful for being here.
So with that, yeah, yes, thank you. Like I said, this was for me. I've learned so much as well, and I hope that our viewers also have some insights, some ideas of how to build your community from where your remote area is. Excuse me, and thank you so much again. Magic Mike will have a picture afterwards, so please stay on the line. We're just going to let our viewers know how to contact us. We have a Pinasli webpage, and you can also be a member of Pinasli. We have three categories, which is the active, the student, and the ally. So if you want to participate in more activities such as this, such as Terp Talks, we are wanting to put Quarant Terps actually on a road show. So we want to visit you, Miss Ishat, in Cebu. We want to visit Sir Charlon in Mindanao. We want to visit our friends from the north in Baguio, everywhere, just to kind of bring our communities together. Here's our website, www.pinasli.org. To learn more about our association and what you can do as an ally to contribute to the community. And if you would like to donate, we have here are membership categories. We also have a corporate membership. So if you have a school or a institution, a business that you also want uh, an affiliation to Pinasli, then you're more than welcome to also apply. And of course, here's the link to get more information. We also take donations because, as you know, putting together TerpTalks takes technical know-how. We also want to pay our interpreters as well. So you can also donate at this BPI savings account. And for more information, just email us at info@pinasli.org. So, what a great morning. We have a great future ahead of us and more talks to talk about. Thank you again, Mr. Mike, Ms.
Thank you.
Ishat. Thank
Thank
you.
you. Thank you.
And thank you to the audience for being such active and participatory audience. We really appreciate all your feedback, your questions, your comments, all your hugot lines. And we look forward to more engagements with you here on Terp Talks, episode 2, or season 2 pala.
Season
Season
two.
2. Yeah, season 2. Next week is episode 2. So there you go. Have a great evening. Take care, everybody. Thank you to the interpreters.
Bye.
Thank you
Thank
to
you.
everyone backstage. Thank you. Thank you so much.